Hey guys, welcome to episode 2. I'm Michael.
I'm Lauren.
I'm Barbara.
And welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. This week, it's A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. Our podcast will be published monthly, at least that's our goal for now, and we'll focus on one book at a time. The podcast will be split into two sections, a spoiler-free description and our overall score, and then a more in-depth discussion of the plot and the ending, which will obviously be spoiler-heavy, and our individual scores of the book. Let's first talk about the author. Her name is Victoria V.E. Schwab. She's the #1 New York Times, USA Today, and indie best-selling author of more than a dozen books, including Vicious, the Shades of Magic series, and This Savage Song. Her work has received critical acclaim, been featured by Entertainment Weekly and the New York Times, been translated into more than a dozen languages, and some of it has been optioned for TV and film by Gerard Butler's production company, G-Base. The Independent calls her the natural successor to Diana Wynne Jones and touts her enviable, almost Gaiman-esque ability to switch between styles, genres, and tones.
Okay, so A Darker Shade of Magic came out on February 24th, 2015. The genres it's categorized under is fantasy fiction, science fiction, and historical fiction. It is 401 pages. It was nominated on Goodreads for Best Fantasy in 2015. It has a 4.09 out of 5 rating on Goodreads. It is the Library Journal Best Books of the Year and the Grand Prix de l'Imaginaire nominee in 2019.
For the synopsis, this is from Goodreads. Cal is one of the last Antari, magicians with a rare, coveted ability to travel between parallel Londons, red, grey, white, and, once upon a time, black. Cal was raised in Arnis, Red London, and officially serves the Marish Empire as an ambassador, traveling between the frequent bloody regime changes in White London and the court of George III in the dullest of Londons, the one without any magic left to see. Unofficially, Cal is a smuggler, servicing people willing to pay for even the smallest glimpses of a world they'll never see. It's a defiant hobby with dangerous consequences, which Kel is now seeing firsthand. After an exchange goes awry, Kel escapes to Grey London and runs into Delilah Bard, a cut purse with lofty aspirations. She first robs him, then saves him from a deadly enemy, and finally forces Kel to spirit her to another world for a proper adventure. Now perilous magic is afoot, and treachery lurks at every turn. To save all of the worlds, they'll first need to stay alive.
All right, great. So let's dive into the first part of our podcast. Remember, guys, this is spoiler-free, so we're just going to be discussing overall plot, themes, nothing that wouldn't be spoiled for you by reading the jacket cover for the book at the bookstore. So what did you guys think about A Darker Shade of Magic? And remember, no spoilers.
I really liked it, but I'm a little partial to it since I picked it out. But I like the world. I really enjoyed the world building that she did. I wanted more, actually. I feel like there wasn't enough. I enjoyed most of the characters. I loved the baddies. I wanted more from the baddies. I like the two main characters, and luckily this book only has 2 characters and their point of views, and it's not crazy amount of characters.
Not 11.
Right. So, overall, I very much enjoyed this book.
Plus side, the main characters don't sound the same at all.
No, not at all. I think she did a very good job of making them sound quite different, actually.
Yeah. I also loved the book. I gave it full ratings on Goodreads when I finished reading it. I loved it. This was my first V.E. Schwab book. And I want to read more of her stuff. And in fact, after reading this one, Barbara and I now own the next one in this series, as well as some books from her other series that we want to start reading in the future. So yeah, I loved it. The world was incredible. The way she built it was incredible. The characters were well developed. I didn't find myself, wondering who was talking. There was a clear, distinct line. You could argue part of that was maybe because the main characters were a boy and a girl, instead of, a bunch of different ones, but
yeah, but some people write boys and girls the same.
That's true. But I loved it. I loved the book. I can't wait to read more of the series eventually too. So
I really enjoyed the book as well. It was a little bit slow for me getting started. I really got into it about like the second third of the book, and the rest it was hard to put down. I agree with what everyone was saying about the world building. I think that she did a really good job of creating this world that you just kind of get immersed in, with all of the different types of Londons. I really liked the characters. The characters were well developed. There were a lot of side characters that weren't main characters, but that I really enjoyed and kind of wanted more information on.
I agree with that.
So I would be curious if later in the series that they kind of get elaborated on, or
maybe more fleshed out.
Yeah.
Later. Yeah.
But I did enjoy it. It just took me a while to get into it.
I also agree with you about the side characters. Those definitely a lot of really important side characters too. So there are two main characters, but there were others that were like really close to the main characters. It kind of felt like, and I also liked. I mean, one of the main things of the book is that there's different Londons, 4 different Londons that are all existing simultaneously within the same universe, but separate parallels. Kind of, it's kind of complicated. But
think of it as, the way I thought of it was like lasagna, and I'm going to reference food because I'm a foodie. So lasagna. So you have London stacked one on top of the other is how I interpreted that.
That's a great way to describe it. And I liked how she almost made each of the Londons a character in and of itself.
Yeah.
Like the way she described the different Londons, they each had their own very unique personality, and it almost felt like the city of London was 4 different characters.
The Londons also had parallels, though, that kind of were interesting. Like, and this won't spoil anything, but there was like a bar that was the same, and she described it as, being similar scenery in multiple different of the Londons. And so I thought that was interesting that there were some parallels too, even though they were so different.
Yeah, they were the same but different. So there's, like Lauren mentioned in the synopsis, there's red, white, gray, and black London. So they're color coded. And you also have to remember, and I don't know if we mentioned this earlier, that this is taking place during the 18th century. So this is when King George III is king of Grey London, which Grey London is like our London. It's the world that we all exist in. So it's 1730s is when all this is happening. And I actually, throughout the book, sometimes caught myself forgetting that it was set in that time period and kind of modernizing it, especially in some of the Londons. But yeah, I mean, the time period played a huge role in the book as well. It was set in that time, the tavern and the way she described what the characters were wearing and things like that.
But before we move on, I do want to talk about the characters. Just like the main 2 characters before we move on, because Kel and Delilah, are 2 very awesome characters, well fleshed out, and Lila is just a complete badass.
100%. Yeah.
100%. And they're very different. Like, their personalities are completely different. She's a cutthroat individual, and he's kind of more... He's a loyal person, but a little more meek when it comes to stuff like that. Like, she has no qualms about doing things that need to be done for her own self-preservation.
Yeah. You also, they come from different worlds.
Literally.
But also, like, if you just pretend that they're from the same world, they would also still come from different worlds, because he's almost what you would have considered in this time like a royal, and she is a poor street girl.
An urchin.
A street urchin. If we're going to go with Aladdin terminology.
They do have a lot of similarities, however, that I found interesting. Like, their personalities are so different, but... they both, in their own ways, and we won't get into spoilers, but they both have their little things that make them a little on the bad side. But then they also have their qualities that make them really, loyal, and, they have a lot of qualities that are similar, but they're displayed in such different ways.
Yeah, I think they have a code of ethics that they live by, and it's, I think, similar in the sense that they follow that ethic, not like... She might not follow how his are, but they are very to the T. This is what I believe in, and we're going to follow it through regardless of what's going on.
So to wrap up the first half of our podcast, we're not going to go into individual ratings right now. You're going to have to wait for that. But our group score for this book was an 8 out of 10. So I think you could pretty easily say that we all really liked this book, especially compared to the last book. On that topic, Lauren, Would you recommend this book?
Yes, I do recommend this book. It depends on the person and what kind of genres they're into, but it's definitely a must-read for fantasy people. The world building was really cool. I would even say, like, kind of the dystopia fans would really enjoy it. Yeah, I would recommend it.
I definitely would recommend it as well, but on the same boat as what Lauren said, I think it just depends on what kind of books you like to read. Definitely the fantasy, I don't really see any historical. Maybe the other two books have that, but this is just like Michael mentioned, Grey London kind of mentions a bit of the time period. That's about it. So I don't see much of a historical aspect of this, because the rest of the Londons are essentially fake parts of the London. But people who like fantasy, people who enjoy heavy world building, that kind of books, 100% I would recommend. And I really liked the book, so I was happy with my pick.
Not surprisingly, I'm going to echo a lot of what Barbara and Lauren said, and that, yes, I would recommend the book. I would recommend it to pretty much all of my friends, but to be fair, most of my friends like fantasy, so I think that that's an easier answer. I mean, but yeah, I like Barbara said, I hope to see more of the historical fiction side, maybe in the future books. That'd be pretty cool. I mean, I liked that you got to see, King George was in the book. He was a character in the book. He's interacted with in the book, but it's not a large enough piece for to really call it historical fiction. Definitely, if you love fantasy, you're gonna like this book. If you like magic, you're gonna like this book. There's a lot of magic in it.
I would say there's a lot of magic.
I mean, one of the major themes of the book, it's in the title. The word magic.
Well, sure, but it's more subtle. It's not like Harry Potter where you're like making spells and stuff like that.
No, yeah, it's definitely more subtle.
And it's definitely more towards the end where you see more of the magic piece.
I highly recommend the book.
For those of you leaving us, don't forget to give us a rating if you like us. If you don't rate us. And follow us on Twitter and Instagram at BadassLitPod. We want to hear from you. If you have a book you want us to read, let us know.
And we just wanted to give a quick shout out to Justin Miller, who designed our cover art. And you can follow him at justinmiller.design on Instagram. We pretty much just gave him a bare minimum of what we were looking for. I wanted to kind of look like the Roe character. Michael wanted to look like a
paladin. I wanted to look like a paladin.
And Lauren wanted to look like a witch, and he created that awesome cover art that we have. So
he's amazing. Check out his other work. One might even say our cover art is badass.
One might.
So if you're listening, Justin, we love it. You blew us away.
Amazing.
Preview of what's coming up next on our following podcast. Michael, take it away.
Next month we are reading Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, which was my pick. Not surprisingly, with the fantasy stuff I guess I've talked about before, and Barbara and Lauren frequently calling me a nerd in the podcast.
We never once actually said that out loud, for the
true.
record.
They mouth it at me. You can't see it because it's all recorded.
Exactly.
So, I'm not going to talk about the book here, but head on over to our Twitter and our Instagram. I'll post a link there so you can read more about the book and even buy it if you want to read along with us. Remember, the second part of our podcast we're about to start now is an in-depth look at the book, and it's spoiler heavy. So if you do want to read this book, stop listening right now and come back when you're done. Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. And here we go, part 2 of the podcast, diving in, full spoilers, full discussion. If you're still here, I hope you're ready for that. If you're not, this is literally your last warning to leave. Stop listening now if you want to read this book. So anyway, let's dive in. So this part of the podcast is going to be about the discussion of the book. We're going to talk about spoilers. We're going to talk about the ending. We're going to talk about what we feel. Got some quotes we're going to discuss, some themes, things like that. So let's go ahead and dive in. So there was a quote. I like to say dive in. They like to make fun of me for that. They're sitting here laughing
That's twice
at me
you said
as
that.
we speak.
Sorry.
So I've got one of the quotes that I wrote down when I was reading the book that I want to talk about is, some people steal to stay alive, some steal to feel alive. That's something that, do we say it was Lila or Lila? Lila. So that's something Lila said. So do you guys think that what she said is true?
I don't know. I don't go around robbing things for a living, so...
The sentiment. Do you think the sentiment is accurate? I know neither of you are professional thieves.
I feel like it's accurate. When you look at how Kel really... His thieving was mostly just for the thrill of it. And so he, took things between the worlds, and it was more just to see what he could get away with.
Yeah.
To get people's reactions when he would bring them over, things like that. Whereas Lila's thieving was more, a need out of necessity. And so I feel like in the real world, that's true too. I mean, some people are just in it for the thrill, and other people don't really have an option, or feel like they don't have an option.
That was pretty much my exact thought. And the pop culture reference for me that came to mind was like, looking at someone like Aladdin, who's stealing literally to eat. He's stealing the bread literally to eat, and so generous he gives it to the children, neither here nor there. And then you look at something like Ocean's 11, or any heist movie like Thomas Crown Affair, or anything like that. Like, those people that are doing that stealing are clearly decently well off, and they're stealing because they need money, I guess, on some level, but...
Don't we all?
They're also stealing because they like the rush of getting away with it. And I think that's kind of what she's talking about, like Lauren was saying, the difference between her, or like Lila was stealing to literally feed herself and pay for the roof over her head and clothes and stuff like that. And like Lauren mentioned, Kel was stealing because he kind of liked the rush of the rule breaking and bringing things from world to world.
Yeah, I think it's more of the risk that he enjoyed. And he was good at it, so...
So last question I have about this particular quote, and I know it's a short quote, is, do you think that besides the two reasons that she's mentioned, are there any other reasons to steal? Or do you think that, like, if you just look at, like, stealing and thievery philosophically from a top-down level, like, are these the only two camps that thieves fall in, or are there other reasons?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel like she does steal for necessity, but a part of her enjoys it, too.
Yeah.
I mean...
But that would still fall under the thrill-seeking umbrella.
Right.
So
are there any other reasons besides
like those two?
Thrills, necessity, like the hybrid, obviously, you mentioned, which I think Lila somewhere kind of falls in a gray area, but are there other reasons? So when I wrote this question, I was like, oh, of course there have to be. Like, what if I, hypothetically took someone hostage and forced them to steal? But then that person is stealing to stay alive because they don't want to die. So they're stealing. And so it still falls into one of those two camps. And then I started really struggling to come up with other potential reasons to steal. So I didn't know if you guys had...
Well, that was my thought, actually, was like, okay, well, what if, it's a gang thing, and, like, they're telling you, in order to join us, you gotta steal from this thing. Then it's still more of, like, a choice or a...
It's one of the other,
stay
right?
alive.
Yeah. It's either to stay alive or it's to... for the thrill of it, if your desire is to join the gang or whatever.
Gosh, we are getting really philosophical.
I know, right? Pretty deep dive.
We dove right in.
All the swimming references.
So, moving past then this quote, did you guys have anything you wanted to talk about before I bring up... I've got a lot of quotes written down, so... Do you guys have anything else you want to talk about before that?
That's kind of...
There's a
lot. I know. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. Like the fact that... What do you guys think Lila is? I think she's just like him in Antari. Because early on in the chapter, when Kel wakes up after she knocked him out, the first thing he notices is that her eyes are two different colors of brown. Like, one is a darker and the other one's like a softer brown. And I always think anytime an author brings something up like that, which seems kind of fleeting and just... like, what do you need to bring that up for? It's going to be important later on. So, obviously, this book hasn't mentioned exactly what she is, but I do believe she is an Antari because she is missing an eye. Spoiler! And it's a glass eye, come to find out later in the book. So, I'm curious to know if the second or third book will mention any of this, or if we're going to find out her origins.
So, I mean, I think... It's designed to make you think exactly what you're thinking. Whether
is it because you didn't catch on to that?
Whether that ends up being the truth or not,
You didn't catch on to that.
I didn't. You're absolutely right. Until you and I talked about it afterwards, I didn't catch on to that. And then I started doing a little bit of digging into it, and I think it's one or the other. It's either that they're setting up the fact that she is an Antari, and for some reason, I guess someone in her world, maybe her dead mother, knew what Antares were and didn't want her to be stigmatized, so they cut out the eye. I mean, because she has no memory,
correct,
of how she lost the eye,
correct.
And so she could be an Antari, and maybe we'll find out in a future book. But
there's other instances where when they're traveling between the worlds, and she goes at one point, and he's like, "Oh no, like she's not going to be able to come through because they're using the power. What do they call it? The Power Stone? What was it called?
I don't the
talisman
from Black London, right?
Yeah, the Blackstone or whatever that they used." Kel was worried that he had to only use that to get her through jumping through the worlds because only Antares can do that.
Yeah.
And at one point she lets go and still was able to pass through. So I feel like there's multiple hinting of something magical with her. I don't think she's just a normal human.
I agree. I think there's something there. And when I was kind of looking this particular topic on Google after Barbara and I talked about it, someone mentioned that, think about the time period that this takes place in, right? If a baby is born with an all-black eye in a world like Grey London where there is very little magic, the first thought is going to be, if you're a religious person, maybe that's something evil. Maybe there's some evil, demonic something there.
But wouldn't you just throw your baby out at that point then? It's the whole demonic baby, not just an eyeball.
Maybe they just cut the eye out. They think the eye's the problem. That was just an idea somebody else had.
That's a bad.
That I was reading on Goodreads. That could be why the eye. That was their theory as to why the eye was removed. Is that they're not used to magic in Grey London, and so they freaked out and thought it was something of the devil, and so they cut out the all black eye.
See, I could see it more from the not wanting her to be stigmatized. And not wanting her to ever realize what she is. Because I caught on that she wasn't human. She wasn't entirely human. But I also didn't think she was 100% Antari.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just because she didn't seem like she was as powerful. But at the same time, if she's never known that that's what she can do, or that that's who she is, then she hasn't obviously had time to kind of hone her skills. So that is interesting. We'll have to see in future books if that gets revealed.
And maybe if you guys like this episode, and then we can do the sequel in the future, because I think we all want to read the sequel anyway. This was what Barbara brought up is definitely the big, overhanging cliffhanger at the end of this book, is that you find out about the glass eye. And
I don't think so.
You think that was the big cliffhanger?
I don't know. You didn't seem to catch on, so why would
No, not until you mentioned it. Then I went back and reread it. So the difference between how you and I saw it is that I read that she had a glass eye, and I got all of that. The literal, she's missing an eye, but it didn't click for me that when I read it that, oh, okay, well, she must be an Antari then, because that's how that works. I did not think about that until you told me that.
Yeah. I mean, I could be 100% wrong.
Lauren?
I thought that I didn't think that she was full. I thought somehow she was because I also caught on to when she was able to cross the world with him, even though she let go, and she was able to do certain things that normal humans couldn't do. Mm-hmm. So I always throughout reading the book thought, okay, there's we're gonna figure out that there's something magical about her. Yeah. I didn't think about the whole eye being cut out thing until I talked to you guys about it.
Yeah.
But I did think that she was part Antari. I thought that she was similar enough to Kel that something must have she could be a half, or
right.
I don't know how that works in their magical world, but
so. Speaking of Lila, there was a quote directly from her that I pulled out that I really wanted to talk to both of you about in the podcast. I believe forward to this particular quote.
Let's dive in.
It's not something that's rude. It's not something that I feel like I can speak to a whole lot. But so the quote is, she says, why anyone would ever pretend to be weak was beyond her. That's the quote. So she's they were talking about how a lot of women in Kel's world, they'll pretend to be... in Red London, will pretend to be the whole damsel in distress kind of a thing. And so some of the questions I wrote down is so first, what did you guys think about this quote? And then, do you think that women still act that way today? And if so, why?
That has always, I feel like some women do. That's always bothered me. I feel like it doesn't make sense as to why somebody would feel the need to make themselves seem dumber or weaker than they are. Growing up, it was always, the little dumb girls in school that want to be cute or whatever, and I've never understood, why that is cute, because to me, intelligence is attractive.
But you're a girl.
Right. So I think that the tides are changing a little bit with the rise of feminism. And just the fact that women are kind of, in the last 5-10 years, have kind of come to a new place as far as how they portray themselves. More women in corporate leadership, more women, activists. So I think that there's a lot more Lilas in the world now than there were when we were growing up.
Yeah, sure.
So Lila would have been, you could say that she would have been a rare breed.
Oh, especially during that time.
For sure. In the 90s, oh yeah.
Well, in this
wasn't
case,
in the 90s.
This was in
No, I'm saying, that type of person, when we were growing up in the 90s, 80s, 90s, would have been, weird, a weirdo.
Yeah, I completely, I completely agree. I feel like people are intimidated by a female who is strong-willed and who knows what she wants, goes after it, who's not stupid, who's extremely intelligent. I mean, you hear about it, people say, oh, she's a bitch, excuse my language, but instead of oh, she knows what she wants, there's always these derogative terms for women in power and stuff like that. You hear it all over the place. The CEO, of a company, if she's a female, they'll be calling her names, and she's, too moody or emotional, and you never hear guys being described that way. And I find that most women, to fit in to a certain mold that they believe will make them more likable, tend to try to pretend that they might not be smart or strong or anything like that, because they're afraid that society pretty much tells you as a female, if those are your traits, no one's going to like you. So, like Lauren did point out, I do think it is getting better, but it's still a thing.
Yeah.
And it's for sure still a thing.
Yeah. And it's nice to see these strong characters like her, because growing up, at least for me, I didn't really see that. It was rare. And when you did, as a kid, you were just so excited to see that. So it's neat to see that in a book here. And it's funny because at first I wasn't a fan of her character. I thought she was a little abrasive in the beginning. Literally the first chapter, she kind of murders a dude, and it was just well, whatever. I mean, yeah, he wasn't doing what he should have been doing. Completely agree with that. But she just seems so nonchalant about murdering somebody. And then in the next chapter, with her point of view, you see her really care about this little kid that got beat up. And these thugs took his money, and she went out of her way to try to help him. So I feel like that was kind of a redeeming quality for me, because at first I was gosh, she's a terrible human, and then it's oh, she's just hiding the fact that she actually does care, and probably cares too much. And in the kind of world that she lives in, I feel like that's dangerous to care too much, because then your enemies can use that against you. So I think she hides that fact, so she doesn't become vulnerable and the like.
That's kind of a theme throughout the book for her, though, too.
Yeah.
Even when she starts to, start caring about Kel.
Mm-hmm.
And later in the book, when she, you can tell that she cares about different things, she's still, the author makes a point to go back and remind you that she still is very opposed to vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's really cool. Thank you for sharing your insights on that quote. Like I said, it's not something that I really felt like I could jump in on. I would like to point out, though, that both of the women on this podcast, in my opinion anyway, are strong, intelligent, independent women, and so that's why I really wanted their opinions. That they're also stubborn sometimes, which is another thing entirely.
No.
So the other flip side of this is, so the quote is Lila talking about why is this woman pretending to be weak when she maybe isn't, right? And so the flip side of this that I wanted to talk about is that in the book, at the beginning when you're first introduced to Lila's character, she frequently dresses as a man.
Yes.
To make herself appear stronger, and so she's not as vulnerable on the streets, because a woman on the streets, I think the idea was that she'd probably more likely to get attacked or something like that, so she dressed as a man, and the police are then never looking for a woman.
Right, they're chasing a guy.
Which I thought was kind of cool, but so I want to know what you guys thought about her dressing as a man for that purpose, and then also, would you ever hide your femininity to help you get what you want out of life?
Oof. That's a
I mean,
tough
I was
question.
going to bring up her dressing, but my thought was more like, I thought that she was dressing the way that she was dressing in the beginning of the first half of the book because she wanted to get away with, like, robbing people, and then they're looking for a guy, etc. But then later when she's going to the ball or whatever, I get that she's still trying to do a disguise, but, like, her excitement about, like, the boots and, like, the male clothing that she picks out
like
for
the
herself.
tuxedo or something?
Yeah, it's like a suit kind of thing, or, like, a very masculine, was just kind of intriguing to me because it was like, you know, that's just part of her, I don't know, like, that's her preference, it seemed. And so, I thought that was super interesting.
I also don't think that makes her any less feminine. It's just,
No.
I prefer pants too. Let's be honest. To do what she wants to do, that's running, jumping, stealing from people, getting up to no good. You can't wear skirts, especially back then. The skirts were insufferable, I'm assuming. So
Oh, I'm sure. Now, and I feel like as far as disguising who you are to get what you want would just have to depend on the situation. Like, if we were in a life or death situation like they're in, where it's like you have to obtain, you know, something, and in order to get there, like, in order to get into that party, she had to be in some sort of a disguise, because otherwise she would be, you know, caught because she looked like a street person. Like, she needed to look fancy or whatever. So I feel like in that right, it would, I mean, I could see myself, you know, doing that. But on the daily, no. I don't normally disguise myself to get what I want.
I just find it funny because I feel just a lot of people do that. Like, other females will use it in the opposite way, where they'll use their sexuality to get what they want. So I just find it kind of a breath of fresh air when this female character is doing, like, the complete and utter opposite of that to kind of get what she wants. And I find it intriguing to see it be used in a different way, personally.
So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing everything about that. I really wanted to ask that question. That was one of the things that, not those specific questions necessarily when I was reading it, but that was one of the things I was like, man, I really want to talk to, you know, the girls about this when we're doing the podcast. To the females
The
about
badass
this in the
women.
podcast. So I'm just going to keep kind of going on these because I'm enjoying the discussion we're getting off these quotes. So another one that I wrote down is a little bit longer quote. So you have to bear with me as I read
Let's
through this.
dive in.
She's going to do that every time, just so you know, until I cry.
I'm going to beat you to it.
Until I cry on the podcast and you hear me sobbing. So here's the quote. So, aren't you afraid of dying? He asked Lila now. She looked at him as if it were a strange question, and then she shook her head. Death comes for everyone, she said simply. I'm not afraid of dying, but I am afraid of dying here. She swept her hand over the room, the tavern, the city. I'd rather die on an adventure than live standing still. What do you guys think about Lila's perception of death?
Michael, would you like to answer?
Sure, I can definitely answer that one first. I
The other ones
can
were all
start.
about femininity.
So I think that her perception of death is a common perception of death in narratives. You hear, I mean, it's not exactly what you hear in other stuff, but and to be fair, I can't sit here and say like, oh, it's in this movie and this TV show and this book, but I know from things that I've seen, there are other characters who've said, you know, I'd rather, you know, go out fighting, or I want to die on, I'd rather, you know, die on my feet than on my knees, and I feel like this is kind of a different way of her saying that, you know, that she would rather go out fighting, or she'd rather go out on a wonderful adventure than she would in her London, in the tavern that she's known for all these years, living what she considers to be a boring life. So I think her perception of death is common in narratives. I think that perception of death, though, is probably not as common in real life as it, at least not now, maybe as it was 100 years ago or further back. I feel like in a lot of movies that are coming to my mind where there's a thought process like this, it's usually like a soldier's mantra, like I'd rather die fighting. And we live at a time now where, you know, there's not as much constant war as there was.
Maybe in this place.
Yeah.
But
Where
if
we
you go
are.
to
Where
Africa
we are.
or
Where we are.
frickin' even
We're
Brazil,
we're
like,
blessed
that
to
might
not
be a
have to-
wee bit different because
So-
we're pretty cush here.
Yeah. So I think it's a less common perception possibly today. So what do you guys think about her perception of death.
I'd just like to say that I copied this quote down in my notes and highlighted it. I just like the things that I wrote over and over about Lila was that she's just a total badass, and I really
Agreed.
like if I were gonna have like a girl crush, it would probably be her. But I feel like even though, as like Michael said, it's kind of a cliche for narratives to like have this, I'd rather die fighting than give up or whatever. I feel like the way that this was worded was like it wasn't necessarily that she wants to be like this valiant soldier. It's more just like she is an adventure seeker. Mm-hmm. And so which I felt like was really true to her character based on what, we know about her. It seems like that's something that she would definitely say.
Yeah.
Whereas in some things, like some books that I've read, it's like, oh, that character really wouldn't say that. That's just for the storyline. But I feel like that was pretty accurate for her.
Yeah.
And I really liked the way that she worded it. Like at the end, with the last bit of that quote where she says, "I'd rather die on an adventure than live standing still." And specifically the last part, like live standing still. Like that's how she sees her life. Which is interesting because when I thought this when I was reading it, I was like, I feel like, she has what a lot of people would consider a pretty exciting life. Maybe not positive excitement, like she's not like, it's not like roller coaster excitement, where you're having fun, but I feel like her life is not without excitement. She's a thief. She's constantly, trying to run away from the police and
moving
run away
around
from people and moving all over the place. And so it was interesting also that was her perspective, is that like that life was standing still, but I think it was for her.
Well, she does say her whole motive for her life and what she wants to do and saving up all this money is to buy a boat and pretty much be a pirate, it seems
Which is so awesome.
Which is so cool. I think that's, I don't know, that was always my dream. I always thought that would be so cool to be a pirate. Anyway,
and here we are.
Yeah, right? Not a pirate. But I think that's what she meant, because maybe her life is exciting and stuff for other people, but I feel that she feels like she's trapped in the society that she's living in this role that she has, and she wants more from life. And she would rather die trying to get that goal in life, which would be, her own pirate ship and her own crew and all that jazz, instead of just kind of living life like she is now, just going through the motion.
So my last question for this quote is, do you feel like that you try to live your life like it's an adventure, or do you feel like you live your life more like you're standing still? And when I say that, I mean like Lila's definition of standing still. So not necessarily like you're not going to sit here and admit like, oh, I've got a boring life. But
don't we? I don't know. I feel like that's kind of hard to answer. I'm never content, if that counts. Like I always want to push myself and achieve goals and stuff like that. I'm never happy, but I don't mean like with material things. Like I want to travel the world, kind of like I feel like she does, and that's the whole purpose of her, I think, wanting the ship is to just escape and go and see the world. So I can definitely get that. I'm not, looting people to get that way, so I'm not really sure. I would consider my life kind of boring, but other people might see it differently, so I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that one.
Well, that's fair. That's a good answer. I think for me, I'd like to say that I try to live my life and try to live every day like it's an adventure. Maybe not in the sense that I'm not swashbuckling and going out and stealing from people and wanting to be a pirate, but I try to learn something new every day. I try to to be active with the people that are in my life and try to, when given the opportunity, I try to do new things.
Sure. Isn't that what they say with books, though? Like, the man who reads goes on thousands of adventures, the one who doesn't only lives one life.
That's literally the quote that's on my Kindle. Oh. It's on the front of my Kindle.
Well, there you go. There's that quote. So, us readers out there, we're living the adventure lifestyle.
So, Lauren, what about you? Do you feel like you live your life adventurously, or do you feel like you live your life standing still?
I would like to say that I'm pretty adventurous as I can be. But I feel like there's definitely room for more adventures. I really like to travel, and my husband is not as much of a traveler. And so we kind of meet in the middle, and I travel without him at times, but I feel like, I don't know, I feel like even when I'm not seeking adventure, I don't feel like I'm standing still. I feel like I'm trying to make a difference where I can.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for going through and discussing that. Next quote I wrote down, we're just going to keep going through these again, is a shorter one. So we don't need to dive into this one.
Are you sure? We just need to paddle.
A life worth...
You brought it upon yourself.
Oh,
okay, we're done.
A life worth having is a life worth taking.
Okay.
So, like murder?
What is,
I disagree.
What does that quote mean to you? I wish I had written down to attribute the quote correctly, but I'm 90% sure that's a quote from Holland.
The Badass Lit Pod does not condone murder.
That's a quote from Holland that he says to Kel. And so, what are your thoughts? I mean, I'm not saying you need to condone murder, but what do you think he means by that quote?
I think he means, like, especially in the society that we live in, where everyone's just posting their best life. You only see the best things of that person's life on Instagram and Facebook and every other social media that's out there. And so people are getting, I feel, more envious of that. Like, I wish I could do that, or that's the kind of life I want, but I don't think people realize that. That's just snippets. Like, not everyone...
It's the highlight reel.
Yeah, it's the highlight reel, So I think what his quote, at least to me, it sounds just like he's saying, if you really want something, you have to go for it. You can't just stand and let life kind of, walk on by, run on by, whatever that saying is. We've already discussed that saying.
Yeah.
But that's how I saw it. I didn't necessarily see it as a murderous intent. It's more of just him saying, I mean, he's an interesting character, he's kind of stuck doing stuff for these people that he
kills
doesn't
people.
like. Well, sure, but only because he has to. He's literally an enslaved person for these two crazy twins, and he's stuck doing their bidding. And essentially, I think he's saying, like, he's willing to do all this because he's trying to find, I thought, a way to break that magic that has a hold on him. Yeah. So, that's how I took it. But yeah, he's not... I feel like he's a very gray character. He's not... he does murder a lot of people and stuff like that, but I think he's doing it because he has to, and if he had a choice, I don't think he'd be doing that.
See, I like that interpretation because I hated Holland.
Oh, you didn't like him?
I did not like him.
He was such an interesting character.
He was interesting, but he was so, like, just brutal, and I just, like, every time I saw him, he was just... Because, like, okay, you compare it to... compare it to Harry Potter, right?
Sure.
Snape, right? So he's like Snape. Like, Snape is doing things, and for those of you that aren't Harry Potter fans, I apologize, I digress. But Snape is acting the way that he's acting for the most part because he has to put on a front to make, to keep appearances for his alliance to the dark side, right? However, I feel...
What? Spoil it,
with Snape and with Holland... I feel like in both cases, they did not have to be as much of a jerk as they were. Like, yeah, you're tied, like Snape, you have to put on a front to, like, say that you're still in alliance with the Dark Lord, but you don't have to treat all of the kids like crap.
So
right?
the
and with
difference
Holland,
between those two, though, is that Snape is putting on a front of his own volition. Like, Voldemort is not controlling him and forcing him to do things. In the case of Holland, he's literally a slave.
Correct.
Like, these the king and queen, brother and sister...
Were they twins? I thought they were twins. Did I misread that?
They were twins. Brother and sister...
Astrid and
what's his face?
I don't remember the guy's name.
Starts with the name.
Astrid was the girl.
They were horrible.
They were such awesome
and they
characters,
had figured out a way to curse him and force him to do their bidding. Correct. Whatever they said he had to do. And so, I thought he was kind of a pitiable character because it almost seemed like at times Holland could crack through. And the Holland that cracked through was true. I don't want to be doing this.
That's true. I'll give you that.
I'm not this person. And then on the flip side of that, you'd see, like, he did some awful things. And then a lot of the biggest action moments in the book, he was part of because of he and Kel, like, he was chasing them through this and fighting. And but it definitely, there were many times in the book where it seemed like it was... Like, you could just, like, Kel would describe, like, his facial expression versus what he was doing.
Yeah, it looked pained.
And he looked like he was in pain. Yes. And so I actually took pity on Holland because it didn't seem
that's
like
probably fair.
He wanted to be doing what they were making him do.
Well, I mean, you kind of get a back part of what the evil twin, what is his name? It's Astrid.
Astrid and, is it Dane?
I thought it started with an A as well.
I thought it was Dane.
Anywho, him. He pretty much likes torturing people for,
right,
poos and giggles. And,
Athos and Astrid.
Told you, Athos.
Well,
okay.
damn.
So Athos, there's a scene in the book where he's, like, torturing this kid who, like, went up against him and his sister, and he's like, oh, you have to pretty much snuff that kind of rebellion out, or everyone else will think they can do whatever they want and try to usurp them. And he turns to Holland and he goes, do you remember when it took you this long for you to crack? So it's pretty much he's been tortured since he tried getting the White London throne and all this stuff. So I feel like he's a bit different in the Snape character because he literally has to do this. He might not have to have murdered that old dude in Grey London. I feel like that was a him thing. He really didn't have to do that. But I feel like a lot of the stuff that he does have to do, he doesn't want to do because, like Michael described, Kellen always looks at his face when he's doing stuff and it looks like he's literally in pain. Like, it looks like he's trying to resist the magic that is making him or forcing him to do these things, but he obviously can't. And I am curious to know, do you guys think he is actually dead? Because I don't.
So that perfectly segues into
Woo, look at that.
My next question, which is another kind of broad philosophical question, but it's specifically dealing with Kell and Holland's relationship. And so the question is, what does it mean to kill someone who wants to die? And the reason that I'm asking this question, the reason I wrote this down, is that it's not a question that fiction, specifically, young adult fiction, asks us very often, especially not when you're talking about a fantasy novel where there's magic.
Harry Potter does.
But Kell's fight with Holland, the epic climax when they're fighting, it ends when Holland essentially intentionally hesitates long enough for Kell to land a lucky blow that almost kills him.
Oh, yeah. Lethal, one might say.
And Kell knows that he welcomed it because he's been enslaved by Athos Dane for so long. And he's been in pain this whole time. And so I wanted to know what you guys thought about that.
Like pity murder? Or
yeah.
Not pity
What does it
murder,
mean
but...
to free someone by that mean? To free someone by the means of killing them.
I mean, in medical terms, we have to deal with that every day. I mean, it's one of those things where it's per state whether you can...
The physician-assisted.
Yeah, so it's assisted suicide is technically what it's called. And that's something going through nursing school that you learn about. And that we discussed, is it ethically or morally, what do you think about it? And I've always been under the impression that, obviously, if someone is that desperate, who am I to tell them no? Regardless, I just feel like state of mind, obviously they're not fully there because they're either in so much pain. In his case, it's more of like he's just being controlled by these things and maybe even doing things that he doesn't want to be doing, that he would rather die than keep living like this. So who am I to tell him, like, nah, dude, you're gonna have to, like, keep doing crappy stuff to these people just because you have to live. Like, I don't feel like I'm in the position to be judging anyone for that. So...
And there was a second instance of that as well that was a little more explicit. So we don't know, like Barbara mentioned, if Holland is kind of ambiguously like, is he dead? Is he alive?
Right.
What happened? Whereas when Lila's going through the White London, the castle in White London, there's that guard, Belloc. I pronounce his name Belloc.
It's the kid that they tortured, and pretty much they broke him, and then he serves them. So the twins control people, their guards, quote-unquote, by force. They don't have a say in what they're doing.
Loyalty.
Right. There's no loyalty, and like
he pretty much tells her like I would rather die than serve them.
He's like, please kill me because there's no other way for you to stop me. Like, I will keep trying to murder you back. I don't want to do this. Please murder me so I don't. And she does, and she feels like obviously terrible. Another moment where I'm like, okay, she actually has feelings, because she didn't want to do that, but she knew that it would maybe be the best for him because he's not doing things that he enjoys, obviously, and he doesn't want to be doing that.
the last piece along those lines that I wanted to talk about is what Barbara actually mentioned to segue into this as to, I want to know if you guys think Holland is alive. Because at the end of it, I think number one, I think he is alive.
They never specifically say he died.
Right.
Kel even says that his heartbeat is just like minimum or something like that.
I hope he's alive because I want to. Number one, he got sent to Black London. That's where Kel sent his body to get the stone out of where they were in White London, where they were.
Should we mention the fact that that's the whole arc of the adventure is trying to get the stone that does not belong in their world. It's a Black London stone, which Black London
artifact,
was like
I think they called
the
it,
poopy
right?
stuff. Talisman.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want their magic. Their magic is like crazy and corrupt, and that's the whole reason why they shut the doors in all the other worlds and blah 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 blah. And they sent him to Black London, so I think he's alive. I really do. I think he's alive there, and somehow, some way, he's going to be able to like break out of there and be like, ha!
So I think he's alive. Barbara thinks he's alive. Lauren?
I mean, I think that he's alive, but I also think, like, how awful if he is alive to end up there, you know? Because Kel even said that he didn't think that he would be able to get out of there if he went. And so it's almost like talking about pity death, I would almost hope that he's not alive if that's his fate based on what we learn in the novel.
We don't know that Black London's a terrible place. That's all just hearsay.
Yeah,
no one's been there since it fell. Like, no one knows.
I mean,
if it's an
the
awful
way that
place
Kel talked about it was that it was basically like hell on earth, and so, you know, part of me is like, oh, I hope he's alive and he can, you know, do something. But then the other part of me is like, that would be a terrible fate to finally be free from these evil people, just to end up in this place that you can't get out of.
So that's my last question about Holland before we move on is. So we all think he's alive, right? And so in a sequel, if we're assuming that he's alive,
in the sequel,
does he come back to the story when he comes back? Because he's free from the twins.
As far as
we know, he's free from the twins now. Because and in a sense, I mean, you could say like he owes Kel for that.
Yeah.
So does he come back as a villain, or does he come back as a guy that's on the right side of things?
I still think he's that gray character. I don't think he's good nor bad. He's both. And that's what I enjoyed about this book. That not like Lila isn't your stereotypical good person. Like, she's done some crappy stuff. I feel like the only one who's your stereotypically great, like, hero trope type of a character is Kel. And even then, he's literally breaking the rules when he goes and
steals things.
Like, transports these items in between worlds when you're not. It specifically says it is illegal for him to do that. So he's a little bit ambiguous, but not as much, I feel like, as Lila, and definitely not Holland. I think Holland will come, if he does come back, I think he'll still be kind of in that gray area, because I feel like when he does come back, it's going to be a me. He's going to look out for himself, and that's that. Yeah. So whether that correlates with what the two other heroes are doing at the time, he might be like, okay, I'll help you up until it suits me, and then after that, like, you're on your own kind of thing.
Okay, so final discussion question, and it is another quote, and it is another long one.
Our quotes.
So listen up, and we'll talk about it. So the quote is, "You poor thing," said Lila coldly. "What do you want? Pity? You won't find it from me. You have a house, if not a home," she spat. "You have people who care for you, if not about you. You may not have everything you want, but I'd wager you have everything you could ever need, and you have the audacity to claim it all forfeit because it is not love. Love doesn't keep us from freezing to death, Kel," she continued, "or starving, or being knifed for the coins in our pocket. Love doesn't buy us anything, so be glad for what you have and who you have, because you may want for things, but you need for nothing."
What a great quote.
Really, it was one of my favorite quotes as well. That's why I highlighted it. So I want to know what you guys think about what Lila is saying there.
I think they're coming from two obviously different worlds, because, and I can't remember who the psychologist does this, but there's the pyramid of needs.
Maslow.
There we go.
Hierarchy of needs.
Yes, the hierarchy of needs.
Lauren would know that.
Right, and the first basic need is like food, shelter. What else? There's one more.
I mean, food and shelter and human interaction.
Right. That's like your basic needs. And I feel like for Lila, that is where she's at. She hasn't progressed further because she's constantly trying to, steal. She's stealing for the food, for the money to be able to put a house over her head type thing. Whereas Kel, like, he pretty much, like she said, he doesn't need for anything. Like, he was adopted by pretty much the king and queen of Red London. So as far as needing anything, he doesn't. But he feels pretty much used or kind of a pawn to them because he's an Antari, so he's always doing all these things for them. And so his need is that he wants to feel loved by them. He actually, or anyone, I think, he actually wants to feel like this connection where he feels a part of their family instead of just kind of someone looking in on their little family dynamic. So, yeah, she does have a point, but at the same time, I don't think she realizes that just because she hasn't met those needs yet, because she's still pretty much fighting for her life at this point, and she doesn't have the luxury of wanting that yet. So,
Lauren?
Yeah. I mean, so love and belonging are just, like, up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, it's very normal for him to want to be loved and belong to something, and I think that he feels like he's more of a pawn for them as far as because he's a rare breed and they kind of took him in because they wanted his powers, really. I do think that they do love him. I feel like his brother, like what was the brother's name again?
I do not remember the brother's
Me neither,
name.
but his brother, I feel like the brother genuinely does love Kel. And I feel like that there is love for him there, but I understand where he comes from as well, as far as not feeling like it's genuine necessarily. Right. And I feel like Barbara said, just that they come from such different worlds that it's difficult.
It's Rye. Rye's the brother.
Rye, yes. It's difficult for me to kind of condone her judgment of him because she's coming from a different place, but also I can see it from both perspectives.
Yeah. I just thought it was cool because, and immediately afterwards, and obviously I didn't include all of this because then I'd be like reading a whole chapter to you guys, but she shares this, and it's like, and it I think you see afterwards in Kel's reaction to what she says, it kind of clicks for him that he's got a lot of really nice things, and he has some privileges that he's taking for granted because he's so used to having them.
Yeah.
And like Lauren was mentioning, he has this stuff covered, so he's on a different level of wants and needs, whereas she's constantly looking to try to get the bottom stuff covered. She doesn't even have time for that top tier stuff. And so I think it helps them understand each other. I think that she maybe could have talked to him about it a little bit nicer because she's a pretty blunt and crass person. But yeah, I think it was important for their relationship because I think it helped Kel also see that his life and his problems are maybe not as bad as he thinks they are. At least some of them. Obviously, some of his problems.
Touching on their relationship, though, before we kind of close out, how do you guys feel going into the next books if we ever do read them? Like their little embracing and the
random
kissing. What kind of vibe did you guys get from that? Did you feel like they were just like really, really good friends? Do you feel like there's a romance there? Because then she just, gets on her ship and leaves. And so it's like, do you think there's a future there, or what did you guys think on that?
I do. So the romantic side of it, and I kind of predicted this early in the book because there's a stereotype, and it's not just in books where the relationships between two characters, if they're so different and they're butting heads, then they're gonna come to fall in love by the end. And I don't think that happened. Like it wasn't a big cliche in that way. No. It's not like she was like, I found the thing I need. I mean, it was like this, but I do think that I think they both have independent goals right now at the end of the book. Like, I think there's some love there, and I think that they both want...
That's a strong word.
I think that they both are interested in each other romantically.
There we go.
And I think that... But I also think that they both recognize that they need to do other things first. So she needs to go off and do her boat and the adventure and all of that. The pirating. You guys are gross. She needs to go off and do
How
that
about
and
she
live
needs
that
to go
life.
out and adventure
Yes.
with her boat.
and he needs to be there for his family and
Yeah.
everything that's going on there.
Right.
And so I think that they're like, man, we want to do this, we want to be together, but this isn't the right time. It's kind of how it's left.
Right.
So I think that in the future book, I'm hoping if everybody gets brought back together, maybe there'll be a romantic angle there, maybe there won't. You know, it's going to be a different
it was
time.
interesting that they didn't even really talk about it. Like,
Nope.
it was this big elephant in the room that I
Yeah.
was like, well, what's happening? Are you guys gonna, like, get together? Or are you gonna... Oh, nope, you're leaving
Yeah.
on the boat. Okay.
I kind of like it because I hate when you read a book, and I get if it's just a one-off, like a standalone book. I get that you kind of have to fit all this stuff in one book. But I hate when it's a seried book, and these main characters fall in love with each other like that. Like, that is not real life. I'm sorry, that's a lust. That's not a love thing. It's a lust. You're a lusting after a person. You don't fall in love with people that quickly. It's not a thing. So I really enjoy the fact that this wasn't, like, forced down my throat, where it's like, oh, I'm magically in love with him after all our adventures, even though we butted heads in the beginning. It's like, hey, maybe I like you because you're maybe the only dude that actually accepted me for me type thing with her. And he's like, hey, she's a pretty cool girl. She's not, like, she's abnormal in the sense that she's not your stereotypical female in my world type thing. But they understand that, like, we've got other things we need to do. Maybe we'll come back to this later on. And I think it's more of a respect between both of them, I think, at the end. Because obviously I don't think they respected each other at the beginning, and I think it's a mutual respect from both of them that might potentially turn into something else. Or like a friendship right now that might lead to something else. And I enjoy that because I'm tired of this. After 100 pages in, this lady is pining over this dude that she literally just met. Like, it's a Disney trope too. It's like, oh, Little Mermaid, but I'm in love with him. It's like, bitch, you haven't even talked to him. You sang him a little song when you rescued his ass.
It's the fairy tale love story.
But that's not real
and
life.
I'm glad that this one had a more realistic tone.
Yes.
And it didn't have the fairy tale love story.
Anyways,
because
I'm done with
you
my
know
spiel.
how I feel about that. So,
Wait, before you wrap things up, I want to mention stuff that we have unanswered questions to. So, Lila, is she or is she not an Antari? Kel, his backstory. Why was he abandoned, or why is he orphaned? What the heck happened to his parents as well? And why did the king and queen, I think Lauren did mention that they kind of wanted him for his powers and stuff, but is that really why they wanted him type thing? Or like, what's the big deal of having someone like that? And I'm curious to know his backstory about that. And then his connection with his brother, since he did that like blood magic thing where he pretty much
He tied his life
tied
to
his life force
that's
to
gonna
his
come up
brother
later, for sure.
So it's like, so now his brother and him are pretty much like tied together. So if something happens to one, it happens to the other. So I'm curious to know that dynamic and how that's going to play in the next books, and how his brother feels about that, because I feel like we didn't get much of that in this. After all that happened, I'm curious to know if his brother is angry with him for doing that, or if now he's a little hesitant because he kind of was he didn't really seem to care. I mean, he cared a lot. He was going to be a good king, blah, blah. They kind of mentioned that, like, he's really good with people, but he kind of had this attitude, like, willy-nilly. He didn't really care about his well-being as far as, like, oh, it's okay, I can go out drinking. Nothing bad is going to happen to me. But I'm curious to know now that he knows that if something happens to him, that might affect his brother, if he's going to change his attitude about how he's currently going about living his life. And if that's going to help their dynamic as brothers and stuff. Obviously, they're not real brothers, but I really enjoyed the bromance in that. You know, like, they obviously care a lot for each other. You definitely got that in the book. Clearly, because Kel pretty much gave up half his life for his brother to save him. So I'm really curious to see how that relationship progresses in the books as well. Thoughts?
Definitely things. She covered pretty much everything. All the unanswered questions that we want to have answered.
And Black London. Like, what is Black London? Are we going to get more Black London? I want more Black London. I want to know why it's such a bad place. Is it really a bad place? What's going on there? I'm very curious to know more about the world that she built in this book. I want more of that, because I feel like we got a snippet of it, and I definitely want more of these
Me too.
world building that she has done.
Me too. I agree. I want those same questions answered. And if you've already read the second book, don't comment on our stuff and spoil
Don't
things.
ruin it.
Because we'll block you. I'll block you so far. I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I won't do that.
That's a little aggressive.
I mean, don't.
We
don't
have like
spoil
maybe
things.
4 followers.
Yeah.
Let's not start blocking people yet.
So, to wrap everything up, we're going to go around and each give our individual score of the book, and then say whether or not we would recommend this book and why. Barbara, do you want to go first?
So originally I gave it an 8, and I kind of, after thinking about it, I want to give it a higher score, like an 8.5, because I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to think of like why I didn't enjoy it. Probably because I wanted more world building, but I get it's a series. There's 3 books in the series, so I get that she can't like throw all this down in one book, and she wants to build upon it and stuff like that. I definitely wanted more of the twins. I wish they hadn't perished. Maybe they haven't. I'm assuming they did, though, because I really enjoyed their conniving evilness, and they were super smart. They're like, sometimes you get these baddies that are just like either really dumb or extremely smart, but can't really back up with like strength, and I feel like both of them, they complement each other, and it was kind of cool to see a brother and sister being evil work well with each other, you know, because I feel like in other movies, if there are brothers and sisters, they kind of butt heads. In this one, they're like all about it. Like they complemented each other and their evilness. I really enjoyed that. So originally I gave it an 8. Can't remember why. Secretly I'm giving it an 8.5, but it's an 8.
Lauren?
I think that my original score was a 7, but I'm also with Barbara, and I don't know. I feel like I gave it a 7 because there were a lot of unanswered questions. It was a little bit slow to start for me. But then the more that I kind of discuss it and kind of dive in to the details, I feel like it's really interesting, and I feel like if I were to rate it as a series, like not just considering it a standalone book, that it should probably have like an 8. But for the sake of my previous rating,
It was a 7.
it was a 7.
First rating was a 7.
I kind of, like, I feel bad just rating one book. I want to rate it as a
I know.
series, because I feel like one book could be really good, and then you can have a crappy book, Divergent, looking at you.
Yeah.
That kind of just ruins the whole series for me. And so
If we do the other ones, we can talk about that.
for sure.
If we finish the series,
Yeah.
and if we do them on the podcast, even if we don't do them on the podcast, but we finish the series, maybe we'll have like a little
snippet.
sneak in a little
Yeah.
series rating in there. Back to the review, though.
Sorry.
My rating was the highest. I gave it a 9. I'm going to be honest. I came into this book when Barbara picked it, and I was like, I love fantasy, but this isn't my usual kind of fantasy.
He likes dragons and swords.
I like high fantasy. You guys know that we talked about it. They make fun of me for it. Can't wait to hear the podcast next month. But I really liked it. I liked it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I really liked the characters. I really liked the world she built. I'm really excited to read more of it. There wasn't really any negatives about the book for me, which is why I gave it a 9. 9 is like, a 10 is like a perfect book, and this isn't,
this isn't Harry Potter.
Right, this isn't Harry Potter.
It doesn't reach that, but it is a 9. Like, if someone asked me like for a book to read, and I know they like fantasy, or even if they don't, like I feel like this is like an okay book for non-big, huge fantasy people.
Right.
Like, so for example, let me just ask Lauren. Yeah. Lauren, you don't read a lot of the same fantasy that I do, the high fantasy stuff. You read a lot of other things too. Do you think this would be? You enjoyed it more than you thought you would, I think. Would you recommend it to someone like your husband who doesn't really read any of this stuff? Like, do you think is it approachable for someone who doesn't like fantasy? That's my question, I guess. I think it kind of is.
I do like fantasy because I like, the magic. I like dystopian novels. I like that type of fantasy. I'm not as into the dragon slaying, sword carrying, things like that.
Nymphs.
Elves and whatever. However,
Paladins.
I feel like my husband is a bad example for this one because he is just like totally turned off by anything that is not realistic. And so I feel like he would not get through the first 3 pages of this book. However, I do have friends that primarily read like chick lit or, mystery novels, but they like Harry Potter. And so I might be like, well, this has a magical kind of aura to it. And I feel like I could recommend it to somebody like that. But somebody who's just totally anti-fantasy, I don't think that they would enjoy it.
The name that comes to mind, or the person for me that comes to mind after you said that, is actually like Mom.
Yeah.
So Laura and I are brother and sister, if you guys haven't picked that up yet. But our mom is who got us into reading, and she likes Harry Potter, and she likes like the Lord of the Rings and the older fantasy stuff, but she doesn't read a lot of fantasy today, and I think she'd enjoy this, whereas she doesn't read a lot of this kind of stuff normally. So it's a really good book. It's safe recommendation.
Yeah, because I don't think it goes too crazy into the magic, at least not yet. I'm not sure if it will later on in the series, but it pretty much takes place in alternative Londons.
Yeah.
It's not like a whole world different like in Lord of the Rings, where it's like this completely different world from what we're living in. It's their London, Grey London, is what we are living in. Is what our London would have been in whenever 18 something that you said this took place in.
This is the fantasy Barbara likes. It's her pick. Makes sense.
It's right in my
likes
sweet spot.
Real world fantasy where it's like it takes place in reality. It's grounded in reality.
But it's got the magical elements or the fantastical
I liked it. I gave it the
fantasy
highest
elements
score.
or whatever. I know, and I regret this. My score, I regret it.
To remind you, our group score is an 8 out of 10. It sounds like we all recommend the book. So if you do check it out, and it's because of us, let us know. We are going to throw up a link to the book on our social media so you guys can get out there and get it if you want to. Thank you so much for listening. We are Badass Literature Society.
You can follow us at...
Hopefully you liked it. If not, let us know. If you have a book recommendation, let us know. We actually got our first book recommendation.
We've got two now that we'll be doing after Michael's pick.
In future episodes, which is exciting. And like Barbara was hinting at a moment ago, follow us on social media. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Badass Lit Pod. We'd love to hear from you guys. We try to post stuff on there and keep it active. Comment if you... Just let us know. Like, say, hey. You don't have to have anything relevant to say. Just say hi. Let us know you're there.
Yeah, please recommend us to your friends and family members that you think might enjoy this. You know, we would love to get more ears listening. And, it's comment on iTunes.
Rate
Review. That's it. Review us. You know, we'll take crappy reviews too. That's how you get better. But
Lauren's sitting away with your finger like, no, do not.
No bad reviews.
Do that.
If you're going to give us a bad review, I like to know why, so we can improve on it. Not just like, I hate your grating voice. Like, I can't change my voice. That is a me thing. I can't, unfortunately, change that about me. So if you're going to make a comment like that, don't.
And now for a preview of next month's podcast. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do the whole thing in a movie trailer voice. So next month is my pick. We are doing Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. I'm really excited about the book. Barbara is kind of excited about the book.
I've already read it.
Don't say that.
What?
I'm just kidding. Lauren is straight up not excited about the book. She's tried to read it. She's struggling through it.
Working on it.
We're going to get there. And that's next month. Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. So if you want to check that out beforehand, we'll post some stuff about that as well. Anyway, thank you guys again for joining us for episode 2. We'll see you guys next time.
This is Barbara.
This is Lauren.
And I'm Michael. See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.